Welcome back, Agile Mentors. We are here for the Agile Mentors podcast. I'm here, Brian Milner, and I also have with me another Brian. I have Mr. Brian Campbell with me. Welcome in, Brian.
Hi. Nice
I always,
to nice to be on the podcast.
yeah, we're really happy to have you here. I always kind of joke with other Brians, and Brian is one of the other ones I can joke with here about this and say thank you very much for spelling your name correctly.
I do that with people too.
Brian is someone who's a member of our Agile Mentors community, and he's shared a lot of really great advice, and he's mentored people through there. So we wanted to highlight that. But he's an enterprise level Scrum Master. He's been doing this for a while. He's got over 13 years experience as a Scrum Master, and has had some really insightful comments in our and post in the Agile Mentors discussion forums. We're going to link to one in particular that's really interesting that. Hopefully everyone here will find interesting in the show notes. But we talked about what we would kind of dive into here, and seeing as Brian has all this experience as a Scrum Master, we wanted to focus on some Scrum Master issues. And in particular, one particular quality that Brian brought up that he felt was really, really essential, and I agree with him, for a successful Scrum Master, and that's flexibility. So maybe we start there and just define that for everyone. When you talk about how important it is for a Scrum Master to be flexible, what does that mean to you, Brian?
Well, there's three things. You've got to work with a product owner at their level. So you may have a brand new product owner who doesn't understand how to construct a story with acceptance criteria, or a bug with steps to reproduce. Other times you have a product owner who's really, really um, on their game and very established, and then you're going to be more hands off and just providing a little bit of guardrails according to the way the company works. You're going to be flexible with the daily stand up. I've had teams rebel against the idea that stand up has to be run cookie cutter Scrum. So you may find that they prefer to go person by person, and that's fine. You may find they prefer to go issue by issue. You may find that you do it a whole section at a time, dev, queue, going down a column on a board, just to try and work with the team the way they want to be worked with. But my goal as a Scrum Master is to make it efficient and effective. I'm not trying to keep them sitting on a call for the sake of being a Scrum Master, but get familiar with how each company does things. Don't try to radically improve things. Suggest incremental improvements where merited. So don't come in guns a-blazing trying to change everything in the environment. Come in, observe for a while, make a little course correction here and there, suggest things if they're above your station that might allow the teams to work more effectively. So those are three ideas.
Yeah, that's awesome. I agree with you on those. I think those are really important. There's kind of this, starting with the last thing that you brought up there. There's kind of an idea that I've heard people say before. I've always subscribed to this as well. Kind of the evolution versus revolution kind of approach to doing things, that you're going to be served better by trying to incrementally in small little doses change things rather than big bang. Let's all of a sudden Monday morning everyone's going to be doing Scrum. Like, just it doesn't
Yeah.
really work very well if you try to drastically change things. I know that's one thing with Kanban I've always appreciated, is Kanban talks about start with where you are, and I think that's a good approach for us as Scrum Masters as well. Is kind of start with where the team is.
Well, I've also done Kanban implementations and where people are doing Scrum and they want to do Kanban, and developers think there isn't a lot of, I'm just going to be wild, wild west and do what I want. But Kanban has its own structure and way of doing things that you need to get the team, its own set of ceremonies, et cetera, that you need to get the team familiar with.
Yeah. Yeah, and you mentioned earlier as well, like trying to be flexible as you work with your product owners. I agree there as well. Product owners, come in all shapes and sizes, as far and all kind of levels of experience. And maybe you'll get lucky and you'll have one that's really experienced and doesn't really need a lot of help, but maybe you'll get one that's brand new that's never done this before. In which case, you have to have a lot of patience and a lot of time to coach and help them get up to speed with what's really going to be valuable.
Yeah, they need different kinds of support. I think the new product owner may require. Let's start that one over again. I
Yeah.
think they require different levels of support. The new product owner needs to have stronger agile guardrails, in place. The biggest problem I have sometimes is there's a product owner that's very set in their ways. I had one product owner who decided that he was going to map out all the work for this quarter and tell assign by developer and even story point the items. And I had to go to management and say, hey, this guy's bad. We'll get into that later. You have a time to move on thing. This was one of my times to move on because management was not supportive in changing his viewpoint.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that's part of just being agile. The you expect the kind of same attitude towards being flexible from the product owner that, hey, I'm going to grow and learn, and maybe that starts with kind of a humility of just saying I may not be right.
Yeah. But I like to form a troika between, well, actually, four people. I like to get the product owner, the dev lead, and the BA all coordinating at the same time. So the product owner's not writing these stories blind, they're getting feedback from the dev lead, and the BA is learning how to support the product owner. It's kind of like that whole idea with Three Amigos, where you get the product owner, developer, and QA together, and you just try and get them to work on an individual story. This is more like at the team level.
Yeah, if you do that, just have to make sure you don't kill the invisible swordsman, right? Little Three Amigos reference for the listeners. Yeah, I agree. And I'm kind of curious there because you mentioned business analysts, you mentioned dev leads, and that's always a hot button issue as well as we think about working with our teams because there's not really strong guidance from Scrum on those roles and how they might interact or play with the Scrum team. What have you seen work well with those kind of roles?
Just like I am an advocate for proper Scrum, you know, agile guardrails. Dev leads are people who have an ear towards the product owner and an ear towards the team. And if they had 3 ears, their third ear would be towards best practices in the company. So they have a very difficult job to wear where they're wearing to do where they're wearing multiple hats. In terms of a BA, I think they just need to learn how the product owner thinks.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, they're assisting, they're alongside the product owner, so it's back kind of like your Three Amigos reference, right? I mean, it's somebody who should anticipate and assist, and yeah, that's what I've seen work well also. Well, I want to talk a little bit more about the developer side of things as well because they're the majority of our team. And if they're not working well, then our Scrum team is not going to work well. And that's always a fine line, I think, too. So I'm curious what your thoughts are here. It's always a fine line with how technical do I need to be, and how do I help my developers become the best version of a team possible without crossing over into getting into their realm and trying to tell them how to do everything.
Yeah, I had an interesting lesson with the latter. I think one of my first gigs as a Scrum Master, I was in a room full of people, and there was a systems architect with all the developers doing something on a whiteboard. And I said something, and they went, "You're here to observe." And it taught me that there were boundaries. On the other hand, there is something you can and should do, which is try to have enough familiarity with what the team's working on and the other teams involved in the project to where you can anticipate what's coming down the line. If you're trying to anticipate that you're forming good connections with the other teams and their product owners, you're forming good, maybe even with their BAs, and you're trying to make sure that the dependencies are addressed before the team comes to the work would be a really good example of that. So what else did I wrote some notes here because we went over the
Sure.
questions.
Yeah, you brought up dependencies. I agree. The dependencies are kind of a huge area for teams, and they can be a team killer. They can be a productivity killer. I know there are people who focus really, really huge amounts of attention on how do we reduce our dependencies and how can we make our team more independent. So I think you're right. That's a huge key to unlocking the team's speed and productivity is just, how can we have as few dependencies outside our team as possible?
Well, that's true, but at the same token, you're going to have, for instance, if you've got a systems team, you're going to have dependencies with them. Right now, I'm working at a company where there's a team they're moving off a legacy system, they're moving on to a new system. So they have to sync the data with the old system, coming out of the system, going back into the system. And there's a team that specializes in that. There are teams that specialize in different aspects of the system. They all come back to the team that synchronizes stuff in and out of the system. So there are going to be dependencies from time to time, but you have to have a good working relationship with both with any of those teams. And, the idea is you get ahead of when the need is so you don't disrupt that other team and their work.
Yeah, I agree. I don't think you can ever really truly get rid of every dependency that you have. I think that's kind of a fantasy, but you can try to limit them. You can certainly try to eliminate the ones that you can, and then try to just realistically handle the ones that are remaining, right?
Right,
Um,
right.
yeah. Yeah, that's a great point. So the other area I was kind of curious to talk to you about is the area of working with leaders, because that's always a huge hot button issue for us as Scrum Masters. I know there's been lots of surveys and things that have been published in the past saying that that's one of the huge kind of determining factors of whether it's going to be a successful adoption of these agile values and principles or not, is whether the leaders are behind it, on board, supportive. But I'm sure you've had the same experience I have. There's degrees. I've never had 100%, but there's been times it's been more than others. What do you think the Scrum Master's role is in then working with leadership?
They're going to set a tone, and you need to work within the tone and realize that, especially if you're in a contract job, you're not going to effectively facilitate change at a VP level, for instance. You're going to have to understand their paradigm and work within it. I think you can advocate for your team, but often you'll be advocating across multiple teams. You see a pattern. Again, goes back to understanding more than just your team. You may be advocating for a pattern you see across multiple teams, and then you come at it from a suggestion that would be in their best interests, or usually in the interest of getting the project done on time. But I've had good leaders, I've had bad leaders. I think about 3 or 4 years ago, I was working for a company where there was a very, very good VP in charge of development, and all of a sudden he was replaced by a guy that turned the company into a meat grinder, and he was very difficult to work for. Well, I think you just have to understand what the leader wants and try and mold to their vision along with those agile guardrails.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think what you're kind of saying there is really important to, especially in light of the topic here across everything we're talking about, being flexible, of just trying to understand that there are things that you're not going to be able to change, right? Sometimes you're going to have leaders that are kind of set in a certain way of doing things, and they're not going to be open to having intellectual conversation about whether there's benefits to doing things a different way and should we examine it. They're just going to want it done a certain way. And when that's the case, I think the word flexible is the right one there to say, look, I have to recognize what's within my control and what's not. And if these things are
You,
not within my control, then yeah, how do I find the best compromise that really gets closer to what it is we're trying to do here?
I think one thing that's really important to remember about that is you have to have empathy for the pressure they're under. And that goes for senior leadership, that goes for your lead developer, your product owner, to a lesser extent, your business analyst. I think they're all under different kinds of pressure, and you have to empathize with them. I think one of the biggest things that a Scrum Master can do in their role is have empathy.
I agree. I think that's such a huge point, not only from just trying to think about and feel what might be important on their end, but to then also try to speak at a level with them that connects and resonates. Because if you understand what's important to them or what kind of pressures they're under, what kind of strains and what they're trying to accomplish as a result of that, then as you present some of these things, you can put it in a language that might be more impactful and resonate with what they're trying to accomplish.
Yeah, you're going to be a more effective communicator if you speak in terms of what they want to do or need to do.
Yeah, it's a tricky thing, and I agree. It's sort of like there's leaders within the company, and then there's the subtle ways we can spread and help to populate the organization with these ideals. So we have a role there as well as leaders to try to help people understand why this is important and kind of the benefits that they might see from it.
Yeah, especially the team members.
Yeah. Well, I know another big area we talked about that we were talking about being flexible and important area to consider as a Scrum Master is kind of the whole dynamic of working on a team, of teamwork, and there's a lot that comes along with that. I know one of the things we talked about was just kind of the whole concept of how you help your team with conflicts and how you help them to learn how to compromise on things. What kind of things have you seen? What kind of tips have you collected through your years on how to help your team through those sorts of issues?
It's important to have an ear with the team to be able to hear when they're having a problem and try to connect them with the right person to solve the problem. You're not going to be the person that solves the problem the majority of the time. You're going to be the person that facilitates the connection to get the problem solved. So it's another form of advocating with the team, but that's probably the best approach that I would recommend to people.
Yeah, that's such a hard thing to do, and you're absolutely right. It's just so hard to, uh, a lot of times we just want to fix things. You see a problem, you know a solution, you just want to fix it, and we can do that on occasion, but if that's what we're doing as a majority of our job, then we're not really, as you said, making those connections that would then enable it to happen on an ongoing basis, not just a one-off.
But it's important also to remember that sometimes a team will have a gripe and it's something that can't be changed. So you have to, especially in a retro, you kind of have to work with them to find a solution that works within the framework or the environment they're in. Both are important.
I've had some experience with this area as well, and I know this is one of the things I talk about in classes because it's kind of a personal thing to me with how I've worked with teams. I'm just curious, Brian, have you had some really hairy conflicts on your team? Some really kind of bad blood between different members of the team, and if so, how have you handled that?
I think my favorite example of that, I was working for a company. We were rewriting all the systems, the main part of the business, and everybody was under a lot of pressure. And at one point, I got pulled into a meeting where and this was during the pandemic, so everybody was on Zoom, and I got pulled into a meeting where the product owner was at loggerheads with the lead developer, and my job became one of being a mediator to make sure both of them were heard, to make sure that they felt their points were valid, but then to guide them towards a place where they could work better together. And I like to think at the end of that conversation, it enhanced their working relationship, but it was very touch and go. That was a very, very difficult project.
Yeah. That's such a great story because it's a tough thing. And I know we talk about empathy. I empathize with all the Scrum Masters out there that find themselves in those positions because I've been in that too. And I'll be the first to admit, I haven't always handled those situations so well. Sometimes I've left it up to them to try to resolve and, have had bad consequences as a result. But I think your approach there, Brian, is absolutely the right one to take. It's not fun to dive into the middle of two other people's conflict. No one would do that naturally in life. It's just something we'd try to, hey, that's their thing. I'm going to leave it up to them. But when we're talking about our team, I mean, we're kind of framing this part of this in the frame of teamwork. that's kind of the concern, I think, when those conflicts start to become really bad. Well, how is that going to affect the team? It may just be those two people, but it's not going to stay those two people. It's going to spread. It's going to get wider in the team. And your approach of kind of just, hey, I'm going to roll up my sleeves. I'm going to get in the middle of this with you. And it may not be fun, but I'm not going to abandon you. I'm here with you, and we're going to find our way through this.
It is really important that both sides feel they're heard, and that both sides understand the merits of what the other side's saying
Yeah.
from a third person.
Such a great point. And isn't it amazing how sometimes that's really all it takes? Sometimes it just, people need to feel like they were heard, that they're not being, their point isn't glossed over, that we've really heard their concerns, we've processed it, it's been considered. And it's such a defeating feeling when you feel like that doesn't happen, when I'm not being heard. So you're absolutely right. I agree with that. One of the other things that we touched on and talked about in this section was the whole idea of navigating the thing that none of us wants to navigate. And that's kind of when we're in that crunch time mode for projects. I remember being told early on as a developer, hey, everyone works nights and weekends in crunch time because that's just part of the industry. You just have to be ready for it. How have you handled and helped the team navigate kind of crunch time moments?
Well, first of all, you lead with empathy. I remember going into a big project that I had a lot of experience with this kind of thing, but the team hadn't. And I said, things are going to get really crazy and very disheveled. And I just want you to know I'm here to support you, but don't be surprised if you get a lot of curveballs thrown along the way. And I remember the business analyst thinking I was absolutely crazy. But especially with large enterprise projects, there's going to be crunch time. You're going to be the person who kind of soothes nerves, a lot like that confrontation we talked about earlier. You're going to be the person who lends an empathetic ear but maintains agile guardrails to make sure process is being dealt with correctly, but not being an agile Nazi either. I think those are all really good things. Again, you want to keep meetings efficient and minimize wasted time and also minimize distractions because the team's got to be heads down during those times. And you've gotta be really proactive about forging connections and getting it familiar enough with what they're doing that you can foresee when there's going to be an issue.
Yeah. Yeah, that's such a good point. Yeah, it's not a position you want to be in, but it does happen even in agile projects. You do find from time to time when you just are kind of caught in that crunch time moment, and when that happens, I love your approach of being empathetic with the team also, but it's sort of, I'm kind of thinking, well, how can I serve the team through this? Like they're going through a tough time right now. It's not fun. How could I make it easier? What's something I could do? Could I hop in there and do something that maybe grunt work that no one else wants to do, but it doesn't take a lot of brain power. It just is going to be time consuming. Can I go buy lunch? Can I bring coffee? Things that I wouldn't do on a normal basis, but they're
Yeah,
in a unique position.
I've done those things, although I had to say that there was one company I left shortly after this, but there were two teams of developers working on a project for 3 months. And of course, because they were not doing Agile correctly, there was no feedback from the stakeholders during that period. So they dropped this project in the lap of the stakeholder. Stakeholder doesn't like it at all. Team's given 2 weeks to correct the flaws. And unfortunately, there are a bunch of people on H-1B visas. So if they don't like it, they can get on a boat and go home or a flight. And it's more modern nowadays. But I remember working 2 weeks, nights and weekends with them. And the only thing I was allowed to do was bring donuts in the morning. And it was extremely frustrating to have my hands tied like that as a Scrum Master.
Yeah. Yeah, it's bad too when it becomes the expectation. Hey, where are the donuts today? That kind of thing. I think there's a middle ground in there somewhere to say, hey, if things are tough, I can do that without it being the expectation. I can find ways to kind of make life better for them to help us get through
You
this.
should
Yeah.
you should always be advocating for the
Yeah.
team.
Yeah.
Even when they're beat down, you should be saying, look, we're under a lot of stress right now. What can we do? What can we do to make things easier on the teams? They're already having enough problems without us making it harder.
Yeah. Well, I want to kind of bring us around a little bit full circle here, because you referred to this earlier, and I think it's an important thing for us to talk about in this section as well. And that's kind of there are times when it's time to move on. Maybe the best thing I can do for the organization, for the team, is to move on. So I guess the question then is, how do you know that? How do you know when it's time to maybe pack up and find somewhere else?
I think the example I just gave is a really good one where, they were being asked to work insane hours. And I'd been on prior projects with this company where one example, they had given me a team with 5 developers and no product owner. And I worked around that by having the team write the stories. I didn't even have a BA. It was really, really difficult. And I ended up advocating for them when they didn't have enough testers. It was just a real nightmare. And then they put me with this other team that was given 2 weeks to do probably 2 months worth of work. At that point, I didn't like the way they were treating the teams. And I said, okay, it's time to move on. Luckily, the company that I moved on to was 3 floors above where I was working, so that made it a really easy transition. There was the meat grinder mentality when it went from being a good environment to a meat grinder. I guess both companies were meat grinders. And then there was another example where they wanted the Scrum Masters to take on project management duties, and I was already in this case. They had given me a 25-person team, which we broke into 5 teams, and we had kind of made it so that I taught the lead developers and all the teams how to facilitate the daily scrum. And we all came together right after that for a scrum of scrums. And then they wanted me to throw project manager duties on top of that. And I was like, I don't think that's a feasible thing for me to do. So I kind of stepped away from that job.
Yeah. Yeah, I think there's moments like that where you just have to look at things and say, I know I've had moments where I've had to look at and just say, I'm not going to be of any help, with kind of the things I do well and the direction this organization is going in. I don't see how I can come alongside and really help them because they're headed the other direction.
Yeah.
And if that's the case, I don't want to tell them, hey, the whole organization has to change and come around to my way of thought. That's not going to happen. Mike Cohn tells a story about even experiencing this as a trainer, of going into different places and private companies hiring him to come and train, and him experiencing things while training that he just realizes, hey, this isn't going to make an impact. Right? Either the culture here is everyone has their laptops open and they're all doing their emails the entire class anyway, or they just say, well, we're not doing that. We're not going to be able to do it that way or something. And at a certain point, you just have to say, well, then I don't want to waste your time.
Yeah.
I'm
I,
wasting your time and it's wasting my time, and it's not helping anything.
yeah, I actually was at that same company that had no product owner on one team and developers working 2 months worth of work in 2 weeks. They were doing scaled agile, so they had a scaled agile Scrum Master class where they invited a bunch of people from all over the company, and all they wanted to do was gripe about how they really didn't want to move to agile and how horrible it was and how they wanted to do things the way they've always done them. And the facilitator had lost control of the room, and I had to subsequently go study to get my certification with them on my own because it was so incredibly off the rails. But yeah, I've been in environments like that.
Yeah. Well, this has been great. I really appreciate the topics here, and I appreciate kind of your approach to this, Brian. I think that it shows your years of experience. Just that, especially kind of initial thought seems to always be one of, let me try to have empathy for the person in the other shoe, and lead from that standpoint, right? Try to understand them at that level. So I appreciate you coming on and sharing this information. Any kind of key takeaways you'd leave everyone with here?
You do want to lead with empathy, but you want to have firm guardrails, like I said. Sometimes they, particularly in crunch time, they want to bend the rules.
Yeah.
So that's one thought. But the other thought is support your product owner. They're already under enough pressure. Maybe it's as simple as making sure that the tags on the stories are correct, or making sure that, I mean, if you're in person, making sure that you show up for meetings on time and that you corral the troops. Make it easy on the product owner because they're under usually quite a bit of pressure. And that's probably one of the bigger ones too.
Yeah, that's a great point. Well, Brian, thank you so much for your time. I appreciate you making time for this and coming on and sharing your wisdom with us and kind of helping us to see from a different perspective a little bit about what it's like to really be out there and working as a Scrum Master today. So thanks for your time, Ryan.
Thanks. It's a pleasure being on the show.